I am a woman who recently got out of prison. Ask your questions. I spent 3.5 years in prison in one of the US states. I'm 40 years old, a single heterosexual woman who was never married. I have an unfinished higher education and no children. By prison standards, my profile made me a real loner, a unique case. I have one peculiarity, or maybe shortcoming. I'm obsessed with truth. While most women in prison live in a world of lies, fantasies, and self-deception, women's prison is not at all what it's portrayed to be. Ask your questions, and I'll tell you how things really are there. Are there many cases of forced intimacy in prison? What did you go to prison for? When were you released? Do they force intimacy there? No. There were no violent incidents in the direct sense. Although I heard from 2 girls that they were persuaded or tricked by deception into this matter, but the details are completely absurd. Women, of course, meet each other and start relationships with girlfriends. But most often this is built on dependency and money. As strange as it may sound, having a girl or trans guy in 2 women's prisons in my state is considered a sign of status. In reality, it's pathetic and disgusting. By the way, one girl got pregnant by a guard and then bragged about it. They brought the guard up on criminal charges, but it's been 2 years now and his case still hasn't gone to court, and he's currently out on bail. The girl herself died from an overdose 2 weeks after she was released by magic early. The prison clearly did everything to cover up the evidence, because any intimacy in prison is technically considered rape, and they were trying to avoid the lawsuit that would probably have been filed. I have a bunch of really disgusting and wild stories on the topic of intimate relationships in prison. What I went to prison for, cite assault on a police officer under aggravating circumstances. When I got out, January 2025. What did you feel when you first got out of the prison bus? Did fights happen in prison? How did you most like to kill time? After I was sentenced in district court, they took me for classification to another women's prison in the state, and it wasn't a bus, but a sheriff's pickup truck. About a month and a half later, they transferred me to the prison where I served the main part of my sentence, and that's where I rode in a minivan. Both times, I was in a small group of girls who were being transported. They kept us at the medical station for several hours, processing paperwork, photographing, checking personal belongings, all that bureaucratic crap. The first day in both prisons is continuous waiting, zero information, and you don't see the other inmates. Plus, during both of my first days, I had a mandatory 2-week quarantine ahead of me. COVID was still raging, so everything went by boringly and without any events. My favorite activity was playing cards. I also liked watching TV and spending time in the yard. They say the food in prison is terrible. Is this true? And if so, how quickly do you get used to it? Well, it's not great. Prison food is never good, but my unique kick-ass prison was known for having food that was better than average because the guards ate the same thing we did. The security and kitchen staff, I worked there for a whole week, could choose better options themselves. They always got tomatoes and cucumbers, while the rest of the inmates got just lettuce leaves as salad. The milk was often expired, the bread was stale, the meat was either a natural, 90% soy, 10% meat. Regarding the second question, the food was edible enough that I got used to it fairly quickly. I was also lucky there were people on the outside who sent me money so I could afford to buy myself spices and seasonings, especially cheese sauce for potatoes, baked or sliced, and, ranch sauce packets for salads and chicken. How true, or rather untrue, is the series about women's prison Orange is the New Black? The events of the series, as far as I remember, take place in federal prison, and that's already a big difference. In my opinion, I only watched it until season 4 or 5. Racial groupings really do usually stick together. Contraband gets inside the country rarely. It happened that guards, both men and women, started relationships or slept with inmates, but this also happened very rarely. We had work assignments in prison production. Where I was, we made and assembled eyeglass frames for all state prisons and even for various youth institutions, charitable organizations. What methods for rehabilitation and opportunities for real change were provided to you so that after release you could start a normal life? Education, courses, therapy. Was there anything like that? Rehabilitation and correction. That's a complete ducking farce. If I'm not mistaken, in the prison where I was, 40% of inmates returned within the first 6 months. Speaking frankly, very many of the girls there, just trash and dealers, and that's what they'll remain forever. That's the bitter truth. Almost everyone is required to go through a rehabilitation program, which is actually ordinary bullshit. Officially, it was called Therapeutic Community, but in reality, these are addiction counselors who arrange psychological violence against the inmates. It was horrible. If you've ever drunk alcohol or smoked weed in your life, they force you to go there. Otherwise, they automatically deny you parole. There were no real methods there. Almost all the life skills courses are mandatory, but all the information in them is absolute nonsense, having nothing in common with reality. It's not education, it's brainwashing and propaganda. None of this works. It's complete crap and a hypocritical spectacle. To pass such a program, you just need to keep quiet, agree, never express an alternative opinion, never say anything positive about substances or alcohol. You just have to pretend that you've understood everything and write down in your notebook the correct answers that the curator wants to hear from you, even if you consider them bullshit. It's mental violence. Psychological torture